Deputy Administrator Glick has a wealth of experience in the Foreign Service, the international private sector, and the nonprofit world, and has proven herself a champion of gender and sexual minorities at USAID. Thank you.
So thank you so much, and this is amazing to see this engagement here and the crowd that's assembled, and I'm grateful to everyone for coming, although I have a sense it wasn't a very tough sell. So I'm glad to see everybody here today. Danielle, thank you very much for the introductory comments, and let me particularly welcome former Congressman Jim Colby, as well as our friends from the embassies of, I'm going to ask you to raise your hands. So our friends from the embassies of Sweden. Oh, wonderful. Israel. Israel was not able to make it, and Botswana. Also not able to make it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Sweden, we'll start with, being a great partner for us here at USAID in LGBTI global development partnerships. It's critical for us to have engagement around the world, and the Swedes have been tremendous partners with us, partnering both with funding as well as with other resources to help us promote inclusion and diversity all around the world. Israel, many of you may know, just hosted the largest gay pride parade in Tel Aviv, the largest one in all of Asia and in the Middle East, with 250,000 people attending. So for a country of 8 million people, that's pretty extraordinary, even more so since very few countries in the region are accepting in any way of LGBTI communities. Botswana, I am happy to announce, just recently decriminalized homosexuality, and we're grateful. We're grateful for that very important step, particularly also on a continent where that isn't necessarily the most common and forward-leaning activity. It was suggested that I conduct a moment of silence today for a young Foreign Service national, Zulhaz Manan, who served in our mission in Bangladesh until he was brutally murdered several years ago. Zulhaz was a fierce champion of human rights who believed with courage and conviction that all people deserve dignity, freedom, and respect. He paid for his advocacy, for his work promoting tolerance and inclusion with his life. We've held a number of moments of silence in his memory in the time since then. But if you will please indulge me, I think I would prefer to honor his service not with silence, but by remembering his great and fundamental human decency, an example to which we should all aspire. Rather than being quiet for a minute or two, I'd like to repeat as forcefully as I can Administrator Green's call for the authorities in Bangladesh to bring the perpetrators of this horrendous crime to justice, because by doing so, they can signal clearly that everyone should have the same rights, freedoms, and protections for which Zulhaz sacrificed his life. It would be a fitting tribute to Zulhaz's memory if the disposition of his case ultimately helped to prevent such violence in the future. So we're not going to be quiet, we're going to be loud. Here at USAID, this annual event serves to remind us that we must live by example, ensuring that our programs and our policies are inclusive of all people. We must strive to include the most marginalized members of society and draw on the skills and contributions of all people in both our workplace and in our programming. It is the best way that we can fulfill our mission in an increasingly diverse world and to be proud of that diversity. Our partners, country partners, implementing partners, and the others we work with, like the Swedes, rightly look to USAID to set a tone of tolerance and inclusion in the development space. In many parts of the world, areas where we do our work every day, this matter of tone, of standards, of expectations for the way we treat other human beings, it's not just an abstract question of social etiquette or the kinds of jokes that people consider it appropriate to tell at cocktail parties. As Zul Hasmanan's family can tell you, it can be a matter of life and death. And even where the stakes aren't quite that high, on any given day, still, in many parts of the world, intolerance takes the form of genuine persecution and oppression that falls heavily upon its victims. At USAID, we can not only do better, but we expect better, and we lead the way in doing so. This group plays an important role in helping make that leadership a tangible reality. I'm also very grateful for the efforts of the people in this room and around the world who champion inclusion and promote acceptance for all. I hope you are all as proud of your work as I am. I now have the very great honor of introducing Jim Colby, though for many of us, he needs no introduction. Congressman Jim Colby served in the United States House of Representatives representing Arizona from 1985 to 2007. While in Congress, he chaired the Foreign Operations, Export Financing, and Related Agencies Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. In addition to his service in Congress, he's a proud veteran of the United States Navy, a senior transatlantic fellow for the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and he served alongside Administrator Green as vice chair of the board of the International Republican Institute. He has received countless awards, but I suspect the one he might be particularly proud of is the George Marshall Award for Distinguished Service from USAID. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Colby.
Well, thank you very much, Bonnie, for those nice words. Great to see such a crowd. Those of you that are outside in the hall, come on back, come on in here. There's room along the sides here and everything. Come on in. You don't need to stand out in the foyer out there. We ought to include you. This is all very nice. Well, Bonnie, thank you for those really nice words. This very nice and generous introduction. I always, when I hear those kinds of words, I always think, well, my father would have liked them. My mother would have believed them all. Anyhow, it's a great pleasure to be with you a year late, since I was supposed to be here last year, but other circumstances had me in another place last year. But it's great now that a year later that I can be with you. And it's a great honor for me to be with this professional staff of USAID that I've worked with through the years in different capacities, but most notably in my years in the U.S. Congress for funding this agency. It's great to be here to celebrate LGBTI Pride Month. In Washington these days, I'm not sure whether it's more difficult to be out as a gay person or out as a Republican. I think it's probably the latter, because I'm kind of finding myself back into the closet as a Republican these days, but I'm out as ever as a gay person, for sure. Whether we count ourselves as Republican or a Democrat or an independent, or whether we are L or G or B or T or I, or none of those, we are all united on behalf of human rights and equal rights for everyone. 2 years ago, when I was serving as vice chairman of the board for the International Republican Institute, an organization that I know you all know something about, for its promotion of democracy and freedom around the world, that was when Mark Green told me he was being nominated to become USAID administrator. It was a bittersweet moment for all of us that were at IRI. USAID's gain was a loss for our organization, but I think we can all agree that the move was for the right person, at the right place, at the right time, and the right job. And I continue to think of Mark, both as from my days of serving with him in the Congress and our days together at IRI, as a very special friend. So Mark, in your great distance right now down in, as I understand, South Africa, thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing for this organization and leading this organization. Among the many accomplishments that he has, I've been particularly impressed with how he's elevated USAID's commitment to inclusive development. And with Mark, inclusive development is not just a phrase, it's not just a couple of words. It's just something, but it's something that he passionately believes in and works on every day to make it become a reality here at home and abroad. With his leadership at IRI, an inclusive development working group was established that showcased a presentation on LGBTI inclusion. And I was privileged to participate in that. And he spearheaded an effort in Guatemala to ensure that LGBTI persons in that country were able to participate in the elections without the fear of discrimination or violence. So it is certainly no surprise to me, and shouldn't be to anyone in this audience, to see him bring that same passion here to USAID. I also want to take a moment to congratulate USAID on its leadership in promoting non-discrimination internally. USAID was one of the first federal agencies to add protections on the basis of gender equality to its own employment non-discrimination policies. It has shown the same leadership in its policies for access to services for beneficiaries. Of course, these may seem like commonplace and common sense policies, which they are, but they go a long way toward raising a banner for others and for ensuring that our foreign assistance programs, our foreign aid dollars, the taxpayer dollars, are not being used to discriminate against anyone for any reason. As I was thinking about what I wanted to say to you here today, I couldn't help but reflect on the number of countries and the cultures that USAID finds in its milieu. You know from your own experiences that LGBTI people are part of every country, every culture, every society. They are found in every race, every economic class, every religion, every political persuasion. I think it's no accident the rainbow flag stands as a symbol and the logo for the LGBTI community. With all its spectrum of colors, it is an expression of the very diversity which we find in humanity as a whole. We may know this. We also know that it is in far too many parts of the world where USAID does its work, persons who would live under the rainbow flag are subject to the reality of harsh discrimination, even unspeakable cruelties, just for trying to live their lives as the people they are. Millions of LGBTI people live in over 70 countries that make the very act of being LGBTI a criminal offense. Several of those countries impose prison terms, even the death sentence, for homosexual acts. Even where such laws are not actively enforced, they are often used to suppress freedom of expression, to blackmail, to intimidate people. It was not too many decades ago that LGBTI persons working in this very agency might have found themselves suffering such a fate. The negative consequences impact every facet of our lives, not just LGBTI persons, but everyone. Think about it. If a lesbian woman in Zimbabwe is the victim of a so-called corrective rape, is she going to feel safe going to police to seek justice? Or will she be subject to even further assaults, humiliation, and discrimination at the hands of police just because of who she is? If a transgender person is beaten in Jamaica, will she feel safe going to a hospital for treatment, knowing that many of the doctors there will probably refuse to treat such patients? Or will that victim have to suffer in silence? If a student in the Ukraine is bullied at school for being gay, will he find a teacher who will stand next to him and stand up for him? Or will he be expelled from school for admitting to being gay? Can a person in Chechnya even dare confide to a friend about being gay? Or might that person be reported to police arrested, imprisoned, even tortured. These are not hypothetical scenarios. They are the day-to-day reality for people that live in those countries and others. And they all come back to the issues of health, justice, education, the core issues that you at USAID confront and work with every single day. So promoting LGBTI inclusion in the development programs is the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. A global research report entitled "The Relationship Between LGBT Inclusion and Economic Development" demonstrated a clear and positive correlation between per capita GDP and legal rights for LGBT persons. For each additional major legal right granted to the LGBTI community, non-discrimination protection in the workplace, marriage, healthcare, there is an associated $320 of increase in per capita income. And where there is an all-inclusive anti-discrimination law in a place, one finds the income, per capita income, higher by $1,376. Now, don't misconstrue what I just said to you. I'm not suggesting it's a direct cause and effect. That better LGBT protection results in increased per capita income, or vice versa. But the fact remains there is a correlation. Countries with better protection have higher incomes. Countries with higher incomes generally grant better protections. This connection may not seem obvious at first or particularly relevant. When you think about it and what you do, it makes all the sense in the world. When one element of society can't attend school or get an education without fear of harassment, when they can't go to a clinic or to a hospital without being discriminated against or denied service altogether, when they can't have a job without fear of being fired simply because of the person they are or whom they love, doesn't it seem logical that this negatively impacts the economy? And when this same element must live in their communities fearing laws that criminalize them, surely that has its own impact on their ability to contribute more broadly to the society that surrounds them. So we should view this as a moral imperative, but also as a development imperative to address the underlying causes of LGBTI violence and discrimination in those countries where USAID has been welcomed into. People around the world look to the United States for its leadership and want to emulate many of our values. One need only look at the demonstrations and clashes in Hong Kong in the past 10 days to understand how powerful the motivation for individual freedom and protection of rights, responsibility to promote the best of American values and use our position and to reaffirm fundamental freedoms. As Americans, we can and we should use our position of global leadership to speak out forcefully against human rights abuses and for the fundamental freedoms of speech, assembly, and association. To embrace these fundamental freedoms, we must truly believe that they mean freedom for everyone and freedom from discrimination. Promoting equal and fair treatment for LGBTI people is consistent with those values. Protecting LGBTI persons in developing countries from violence and discrimination is standing for our own rights. It is not a partisan issue. It is simply the right thing to do. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing every day around the globe. It's important work. It's often complicated. Progress can seem painfully slow, but it is worth the effort. And together I believe that we can build a more accepting and understanding world, one in which all people, can live their lives unfettered by the fear of discrimination. So thank you again for having me here today, and let me wish you a very happy Pride Month. Thank you.